The first birds begin to appear before the pavement has fully dried. In a shallow puddle left behind in a parking lot, a small group of sparrows stands still longer than usual. There is no immediate feeding, no quick darting movement between crumbs. Instead, several of them pause, bodies slightly rounded, feathers lifted away from the surface. Their outlines look softer, less defined than they did in warmer months. From a distance, they appear larger than they are. Nothing in the scene suggests urgency, but the stillness is not passive. The air temperature has dropped just enough that remaining exposed becomes costly. Not instantly, but steadily. Heat loss does not happen in a single moment, it accumulates across minutes, across repeated exposures. For a small-bodied animal, that accumulation becomes a constraint that shapes nearly every decision in the day. What appears here is not a reaction to cold as an isolated event, but a pattern that emerges whenever certain conditions align: low ambient temperature, limited immediate movement, and the absence of direct solar gain. In these conditions, birds begin to adjust the structure of their own surface. Feathers are not pressed tightly against the body. Instead, they loosen. This loosening is not random. It increases the volume of air held between the outer feathers and the skin. Air, when still, resists heat transfer. By expanding the layer of trapped air, the bird reduces the rate at which body heat escapes into the surrounding environment. But this adjustment introduces a trade-off. A bird with fluffed feathers is less streamlined. The body encounters more resistance when moving through air. The wings must work slightly harder to generate the same lift. If the bird were to remain in this state during extended flight, the cost of movement would increase. So the behavior does not appear uniformly across all contexts. It is not a permanent condition of winter. It is selective. In the parking lot, where movement is minimal, and the birds remain grounded, the cost of reduced streamlining is negligible. The benefit: slower heat loss becomes dominant. The feathers lift. Later, when the same birds move between rooftops or cross open spaces, the body shape tightens again. The feathers compress, reducing drag. The insulating layer becomes thinner, but the duration of exposure during flight is shorter, and the heat generated by muscle activity partially offsets the loss. The behavior shifts with context. This is not about maintaining a constant internal state. It is about managing change over time. If we stay with the same group of birds through the morning, another pattern becomes visible. Not all individuals fluff their feathers to the same degree at the same time. Some remain relatively compact, even in the same air temperature. The difference is not arbitrary. Birds that have just landed, after a short flight, tend to remain less fluffed initially. Their body temperature is slightly elevated from muscle activity. The immediate need to conserve heat is lower. As they settle and movement decreases, their feathers gradually loosen. Others, which have been stationary longer, show more pronounced fluffing. Their bodies have already begun to lose heat, and the need to slow that loss becomes more immediate. The behavior tracks not only the external environment, but also the recent history of the individual. This introduces another constraint: time. The effectiveness of fluffing depends on how long the bird remains in a given state. If the bird frequently alternates between movement and stillness, the structure of the feathers adjusts repeatedly. Each adjustment carries a small cost: muscle activation, repositioning, slight delays in response. But the alternative, maintaining a fixed feather structure regardless of context, would be less efficient overall. Either too much heat would be lost during still periods, or too much energy would be spent during movement. The repeated adjustment becomes the viable path. As the day progresses, sunlight begins to reach parts of the lot. The puddle shrinks, and the birds shift position slightly, moving into areas where light reaches the ground. Here, the pattern changes again. In direct sunlight, some birds reduce the degree of feather fluffing. The external heat input alters the balance. The need to trap additional air decreases. In some cases, birds even expose parts of their bodies by slightly adjusting wing position, allowing sunlight to reach closer to the skin. But this exposure is limited. Full compression of feathers is rare while the air remains cold. The bird balances between gaining heat from the environment and retaining the heat it already has. There is no single optimal state, only a range of viable states that shift with conditions. Wind introduces another layer of complexity. When a light breeze passes through the lot, the fluffed feathers are disturbed. The trapped air layer becomes less stable. Moving air increases heat transfer, reducing the effectiveness of insulation. In response, some birds partially compress their feathers, not fully, but enough to reduce the penetration of airflow. Again, a trade-off appears. More compressed feathers reduce insulation thickness, but improve resistance to wind disruption. The bird does not choose one extreme over the other. It settles into a middle state that limits both types of loss. This pattern continuous adjustment within constraints repeats throughout the day. By late afternoon, as temperatures begin to drop again, the behavior becomes more consistent across individuals. Movement decreases, feeding becomes less frequent, the birds spend longer periods in place, and feather fluffing becomes more pronounced and sustained. At this stage, the cost of heat loss outweighs most other considerations. The environment narrows the range of viable strategies, but even here, the behavior does not become uniform. Birds position closer to structures' walls, parked cars, low barriers often show slightly less fluffing than those in open areas. These structures reduce wind exposure and may retain some heat. The microenvironment changes the balance, even within a few meters. The behavior reflects these small differences. As evening approaches, the group begins to disperse. Some move toward denser vegetation at the edge of the lot. Others settle into small gaps under overhangs or between objects. In these sheltered locations, feather fluffing reaches its highest levels. Here, the birds will remain for extended periods with minimal movement. The insulating layer becomes critical. The trapped air is maximized, and the body reduces exposure as much as possible. But even in this state, the behavior remains flexible. If disturbed by sudden noise or movement, the birds compress their feathers almost instantly before taking flight. The transition is rapid, suggesting that the structure is actively maintained, rather than passively held. This ability to shift quickly between states is part of what makes the strategy viable. Insulation is not fixed, it is adjustable in real time, across the entire day, from the first appearance at the puddle to the final settling in sheltered spaces. The same pattern persists. Feather fluffing emerges, not as a single response to cold, but as a continuous adjustment shaped by competing constraints. Temperature, movement, wind, sunlight, and time all interact. The bird does not eliminate these constraints, it moves within them, and the soft, rounded shape that appears in winter, what looks like a simple visual change, is the visible result of that ongoing negotiation. By the next morning, when the pavement is dry, and the puddle has disappeared, the same conditions may return, or they may not. But when they do, the behavior will reappear, not as a fixed routine, but as a pattern that forms again under similar pressures. The feathers will lift, not all at once, and not in the same way every time, but consistently enough that the shape becomes familiar, an outline that signals not just the presence of cold, but the way small animals remain viable within it.